The Archeron fleet drifted silently through the cold vastness of the galaxy, their sensors stretched far across the stars, picking up faint signals from remote systems. One small planet stood out amongst the noise, a primitive world, blue and green, teeming with life, its people fighting for survival against their own kind across scorched lands and crumbling cities. A strange transmission flickered onto their screens. It wasn't a cry for help, it was a message of defiance, a warning sent not from weakness, but from strength. Though crude and distorted, the signal pulsed with purpose. The Archerons watched with curiosity as the message repeated over and over again, a single word from the humans' challenge. The captain of the fleet, Commander Jarvik, smiled as he gazed at the transmission screen. The species on this planet had to be primitive, the signal itself primitive, a simple plea that he had seen many times before throughout his long conquest of the stars. But something gnawed at him, a sense of unease, not in the signal itself, but in its timing. A message wasn't just a plea, it was an invitation, one that felt like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. He felt something he hadn't in centuries' anticipation. "Prepare the ships," Jarvik ordered, his voice cold as the endless void that stretched before them. The fleet descended into the solar system unnoticed at first, but the humans on Earth were already waking up to something they had never felt before, an alien presence, something vast and dark, blotting out the sun as 100 ships entered their atmosphere. Without warning, their military scrambled into action, but their technology was no match for the advanced ships now hovering above their cities. At first, the humans thought it was another military exercise, a drill, a test of some kind. They were wrong. The first blast hit Washington, D.C., a shockwave that sent buildings crumbling into ruins, entire streets ignited with fire. The humans weren't ready. They had never faced anything like this. The attack came so swiftly, so overwhelmingly, that even their best fighter jets were helpless against the arcing energy beams that lashed out from the alien ships. Across the world, panic set and people scrambled for shelter, fighting for their lives, but they didn't run, they didn't hide, they fought back with what they had, despite being outclassed, despite knowing that their guns and bombs were little more than toys against the alien weaponry. Humanity fought for their home, for their future, for their species. A lone soldier in a forgotten corner of the world raised his rifle toward the sky and pulled the trigger, and though his shot had no effect on the ships above, it sparked something inside him, a sense of defiance that would spread across the world. Meanwhile, back in space, the Archeron fleet continued its assault on Earth's cities, methodical and precise, no mercy shown as they advanced to claim the planet and its resources. But Jarvik felt something stir within him, an odd feeling, a prickling sensation at the back of his mind. It wasn't fear, but something else, something he couldn't name. The humans were fighting back far more aggressively than expected, but it was not just their resistance that troubled him, it was their tenacity, the way they refused to die. It was not what he had expected from this species. "Signal the ground forces," Jarvik commanded as he watched the chaos unfold below. But even as the ground forces began their descent, a thought lingered in his mind. What if these humans were more than what they appeared? What if they weren't simply an obstacle, but something far more dangerous than any species he had ever encountered? The skies above Earth burned with the fire of alien ships. Their massive forms blotted out the sun as they descended upon every major city across the globe. Humanity's response was as swift as it was unprepared. The air was thick with the roar of jet engines and the sharp hum of anti-aircraft fire, but it was futile against the advanced weaponry of the invaders. The first wave fell in moments, entire air forces wiped from the sky. The shockwaves of impact shook the earth and sent cities crumbling into dust as firestorms ravaged the landscape. Yet amid the destruction, something strange began to happen. The humans did not surrender, they did not flee in terror as many had predicted. They fought with a brutal instinct born from centuries of conflict. Their soldiers took to the streets with rifles and explosives, old tools of war against weapons far beyond their comprehension. They fought with everything they had. Civilians became warriors, engineers turned into soldiers. Everyone who'd hold a weapon did so without hesitation. They fought back with the ferocity of cornered animals, and it wasn't just the soldiers. Those who had never seen battle before picked up whatever they could find to defend their homes. They understood something primal, that this was their world, their only world, and they would not lose it. One of the first to lead the resistance was General Marcus Hale, a man whose life had been defined by war, but not of the kind that was expected of him. His unit had been deployed to various peacekeeping missions around the world, but as the alien ships began to land in his home country, he knew that peace was an illusion. It had never existed, and now it was time to fight for survival. Marcus stood on the ruins of a military base, once a symbol of national pride, now reduced to rubble, his face smeared with dirt and blood. As he surveyed the battlefield, the smoke of the destroyed airfields rising like a blanket of grief around him. His men were exhausted, but they fought on, their hands blistered from the grips of weapons that weren't made for close combat, their eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. But they fought on. It wasn't just training that made them dangerous, it was their refusal to give up despite the odds, despite the alien ships firing down from above. Humanity had been through too much to be afraid anymore. The battle for Earth had begun, and the enemy had no idea what they had unleashed. Marcus watched as a young soldier named Emily fired a rocket launcher into an incoming Archeron transport ship. It hit dead center and exploded in a burst of light. The shockwave knocked them all to the ground, but they quickly recovered. The soldiers didn't cheer, they didn't smile, they just got up and continued to move forward. The fear was still there, but it was buried beneath something stronger, something that had been forged by years of wars of rebellion, of fighting against the impossible and winning against all odds. The human resistance wasn't just a collection of soldiers, it was a force of nature driven by a collective will to survive, a shared understanding that no matter how many times they were knocked down, they would rise again. The Archerons who had expected to walk over them now found themselves struggling to contain the chaos that was spreading across the planet. As the hours passed, the humans learned quickly. They adapted and fought back with an intensity that shocked the Archerons. Their guerrilla tactics were devastating and unpredictable. The invaders, who had once believed themselves invincible, were now starting to see that they were facing something different, something they couldn't quantify, something that would not bend. The battle was far from over, but humanity had made its first strike, and the Archerons knew that their victory was no longer certain. The Archerons had underestimated the humans, and now they were learning just how costly that mistake would be. Their advanced forces continued to push deeper into Earth's cities, but the resistance only grew stronger with each passing day. Humanity was not simply defending their home, they were evolving, adapting to the unpredictable nature of the war. The soldiers were quick to learn new tactics from every skirmish they fought, whether it was a bombed-out district or a collapsing skyscraper. They fought using the land as much as their weapons. Their ingenuity became as deadly as the alien technology they faced. Across the globe, new alliances were forged between nations who had once been enemies. Now they stood side by side against a common foe. Soldiers from every corner of the world learned to fight together, as if they had always done so. The lines between military and civilian blurred as people built traps, rigged explosives, and scavenged for weapons. It was as though the entire planet had become a single fighting force, and it wasn't just soldiers anymore. Even the children learned how to make simple bombs or dismantle enemy technology. They were all bound together by a single purpose: to drive the invaders from their home. Marcus Hale watched as his men adapted each day, a new tactic, a new way to strike back. He had always known humanity could be dangerous, but never like this. It was not just the knowledge of how to fight, it was the will to never stop, no matter the cost, no matter the number of their dead. Humanity could take punishment and keep moving forward. It was their strength of spirit that made them unstoppable. The Archerons were learning that lesson the hard way. One night, during a particularly brutal battle in the ruins of New York City, a group of human soldiers found a small pocket of survivors trapped beneath the rubble of a collapsed building. The Archerons had been relentless in their attacks, and the civilians who hadn't managed to escape were now pinned under tons of debris. The humans could have ignored them, focused solely on the fight ahead, but they didn't. They risked their lives to save them, pulling people from the wreckage. In the face of certain death, they didn't hesitate. The survivors looked up at them wide-eyed, some in shock, others in awe. But no one said a word. They simply followed their rescuers as they led them to safety. There was no time to ask why, no time to wonder what made these soldiers different from any others. It was the human way to fight for others, to protect what they loved, and now they were fighting for the entire world. Meanwhile, in orbit, the Archeron fleet had begun to experience something they had never expected: fear. The humans had proven that they could not be crushed by superior firepower. They were relentless and unpredictable. Their survival instinct was beyond anything. The Archerons had calculated the battle was no longer about technology. It was about willpower, and human will to survive was something the Archerons could not understand. They were warriors bred for victory, yet they now found themselves in a war that was not fought with strength or science, but with spirit. Jarvek stood at the helm of the flagship, gazing at the live feeds of Earth below, his mind racing as he watched humanity's resistance spread and grow. The humans had become a force that could not be contained. Each victory seemed to make them stronger, more unified. It was as if they were drawing power from the very struggle itself. Jarvek knew that if they didn't act soon, the humans would become more than just a nuisance. They would become a true threat, the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. The Archerons had seen enough. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate humanity, and now they were about to pay the price. Jarvek stood at the helm of his ship, looking down at the chaos on Earth below. The humans were resilient, no doubt, but it was time to crush their will before they could evolve any further. He had given them time to prove themselves, and now it was time to end the war. The Archeron War Council had agreed it was too dangerous to allow this planet to survive. They would launch a full-scale invasion, the likes of which humanity could never imagine. Jarvik gave the order, and the fleet began its descent toward Earth in full force. Massive destroyers and dreadnoughts cut through the atmosphere like knives through flesh, their weapons primed to decimate everything in their path. They had no intention of negotiating this time. No plea for surrender would be entertained. Humanity had fought valiantly, but they had fought in desperation. The Archerons would make an example of them. The first wave landed in the heart of what was once London. The massive ships unleashed a torrent of destruction, their weapons igniting the city into a firestorm. Whole districts evaporated under the barrage. The ground shook as the bombardment leveled everything in its path. The humans had no time to react. They had never faced anything so relentless, so merciless. That even in the face of annihilation, the humans did not break. They gathered their forces and responded immediately. As the Archean ground forces began to deploy their elite shock troops, humanity's soldiers poured into the streets with the same fury they had shown since the beginning. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight to prove that they were more than just a primitive species. This was a fight to show that they were worthy of the stars. Marcus Hale stood at the front lines once more, watching the destruction unfold around him. His heart pounded in his chest as he observed the enemy formations. They were powerful, no doubt, but they were not invincible. Humanity had learned how to fight these invaders, and now they had one advantage that the Arcturans could not anticipate. The humans knew their world better than any conqueror ever could. He watched as his men activated a new weapon, one they had been secretly working on. A modified EMP that could disable the Archean ships hovering above them. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance they had. As the energy pulse fired into the sky, the first of the Archean ships flickered and dropped from the sky. The humans cheered in disbelief. They had taken down one of the invaders' ships. It was a small victory, but it was enough to show them that they could win. On the ground, the humans were engaged in fierce combat with the Archean shock troops. Their weapons were no match for the Archeans' advanced armor, but they had the edge in numbers and cunning. Marcus led his team through the city ruins, firing and retreating, regrouping only to attack again. His soldiers moved as if they had been trained for years in this brutal new style of warfare. The Archeans were starting to feel the pressure. The human resistance was not just a nuisance, it was a force to be reckoned with. In orbit, Jarvik watched as one of his fleet ships fell to Earth. The humans had done the unthinkable, and for the first time since the invasion began, he felt a flicker of doubt. His warriors had expected a quick victory, but now they were trapped in a deadly stalemate with an enemy who wouldn't quit no matter the cost. The war was far from over, but something inside Jarvik told him that humanity was far more dangerous than any other species he had ever faced. The Archeans had never anticipated such fierce resistance. Their forces were stretched thin. The ground assault had turned into a brutal war of attrition, and their fleet in orbit was beginning to feel the strain. Humanity was learning, quickly adapting to each new threat they faced. The initial shock and awe of the Archeans had given way to the reality of a drawn-out battle. Humanity's refusal to break had become a constant thorn in their side. Jarvik watched from his flagship as the battle continued below him. His once proud fleet had suffered losses in the tens of thousands. The humans had taken down another of their dreadnoughts with a series of guerrilla strikes that struck deep at their heart. The Archeans had believed they would be able to suppress any resistance with their superior firepower, but they were learning that humanity did not fight like the other species they had conquered. They fought with something more than strategy. They fought with a raw determination born from centuries of survival. It wasn't just the weapons or the tactics, it was the human spirit that had become their most deadly weapon. The humans didn't fight to win. They fought because they had to. It was their only option. The human soldiers had learned to turn desperation into power. They were the underdogs of the galaxy, and they would make sure their enemies knew it. In the streets of New York, Marcus Hale moved among the resistance commanders, rallying his troops, encouraging them to push forward. Their soldiers were battered but not broken. They had taken back blocks of the city. But the Archeans were relentless. They kept coming, wave after wave of alien shock troops pouring through the streets, their energy shields flashing as they advanced. But the humans did not falter. Every soldier knew that to give up now would mean the end of Earth. The sky above rumbled as more Archean reinforcements descended. Marcus knew the battle could not last much longer. The humans had no more resources, no more backup, but they had their will, and that was something the Archeans could not calculate. It was something the invaders had never expected. One of Marcus's commanders, Lieutenant Sophia Greer, had been working on something. An experimental weapon, something that could turn the tide of the war for good. They had discovered a weakness in the Archean technology, a flaw in their shielding systems that could be exploited if they could just get close enough. Sophia's team had built a new weapon, a makeshift EMP that could be deployed against the heart of the Archean ground forces, but getting it into position would mean they would have to break through the enemy lines. "Marcus, we got one shot at this." Sophia sent her face grin with the weight of what was to come. "I know," Marcus replied, "but we don't have a choice." The plan was simple. They would take the EMP and plant it within the heart of the Archean base in Central Park. The Archeans had established it as their command center, but it was heavily guarded. The humans would have to use everything they had to make it there alive. The mission began at nightfall. A small group of the toughest fighters moved under the cover of darkness toward their target. They fought tooth and nail against the Archean shock troops who were entrenched in the area, but the humans were relentless. They pushed forward through the barricades and into the heart of the Archean command center. As the EMP was set in place, the soldiers knew this was their last stand. This one strike could mean everything, but it also meant they would not survive to see the results, yet none of them hesitated. As the countdown began, Marcus knew that the Arcturans would never see this coming. This small, desperate strike could change everything for humanity and for the galaxy. In orbit, Jarvik watched as the humans advanced on the central base. The signals flashing on his screens told him everything he needed to know. They were attempting a desperate gambit. But the more he studied, the more he realized the humans weren't just reacting. They were calculating their every move. Their resolve was more dangerous than any weapon they had. The EMP detonated with a flash that could be seen for miles across the shattered city. Its pulse rippled through the Arcturan command center, disabling all of their systems. For a precious moment, the ground trembled beneath the invading forces, and for the first time since the start of the war, the Arcturans were thrown into chaos. Their weapons shut down, their shields faltered, and the resistance seized the opportunity with a speed and precision that sent shockwaves through their ranks. In the streets, the humans pressed their advantage. The Arcturan forces were reeling from the EMP, their ranks scattered as they tried to regain control, but the humans had learned to strike without mercy and moved in swarms faster than the invaders could react. Guerrilla groups emerged from the shadows, turning the tide in ways the Arcturans could never have imagined. With their communication systems crippled, the invaders lost coordination, and the humans exploited every gap in their defenses. Marcus Hale stood in the ruins of what had once been a thriving metropolis, the streets now bathed in the red glow of burning wreckage. As the humans pushed the Arcturans back, he could feel the shift in momentum. A palpable energy had taken hold of his people. It was as though something deep within them had awakened, as though the war had unlocked a hidden power, a strength that went beyond physical might, beyond any weapon the humans had ever known. The last few weeks of fighting had changed them all. They had learned to move as one even when they were scattered. They fought with a shared determination, a collective will that could not be crushed by alien firepower or superior technology. It was as though the very essence of humanity had become a weapon, and it was this that the Arcturans could not understand. And then the unthinkable happened. Beneath the ruins of an ancient city long buried deep under the earth, a discovery was made. It was a relic, something older than anything the Arcturans had ever encountered, a weapon unlike any other, a dormant force that had lain hidden beneath the surface for millennia. It was a piece of humanity's forgotten past, something they had long ago abandoned, yet in their darkest hour it had been awakened, and now it coursed through their veins. The discovery of the relic sparked a chain reaction within humanity that could not be undone. What had once been an ordinary people scattered across a dying world now felt the surge of something greater, something ancient that connected them all as one. No longer were they merely survivalists or soldiers fighting for their homes. They had become something more, a new breed of warriors infused with the power of the very earth itself. The first few humans who encountered the relic felt its energy ripple through them. They became stronger, faster, more aware of their surroundings. Their senses sharpened and their bodies transformed. The power that surged within them was overwhelming, but it was controlled as though it had always been part of them, as though their DNA had always been waiting for this moment to evolve. They could feel the hum of the earth beneath their feet. The pulse of the planet was now their own. As the relic's influence spread through humanity, they began to realize the truth. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something much larger. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, for a future. They had never imagined their strength now matched that of the Arcturans, and with every passing moment, humanity's power grew. The Arcturans in orbit had no way of knowing what was happening on the ground. They were still recovering from the EMP, and had not realized that humanity's very nature had changed. They were no longer facing a desperate species. They were facing a new kind of warrior, a force that could not be stopped. And as the humans unleashed their newfound power, the Arcturans began to realize that the war was no longer something they could win. It was something they had to survive. Jarvik watched as his fleet struggled to hold its position. Humanity was not simply defending its world anymore. It was now preparing to take the war to the stars, and the Arcturans knew that they were no longer the apex predators in this galaxy. The Arcturan fleet above Earth was now in disarray, their once unified formations breaking apart as their forces below scrambled to reorganize, but the damage had already been done. Humanity was no longer a primitive species. It was a living storm, a force of nature that could not be contained. The relic's power surged through every soldier, every civilian, every fighter who took up arms, and their will to survive had been replaced by something far more dangerous, a sense of destiny. Marcus Hale stood on the front line watching the Arcturan forces regrouping in the distance, their once immense power now looking fragile. Their ships in orbit no longer glided through the stars with the confidence they had once held. Now they hovered like wounded beasts, uncertain of their next move, and for the first time since the war began, Marcus felt the shift within himself, something ancient, something that had always been there, but had now come fully to life. It was a certainty that humankind had never felt before, an unshakable belief that they were destined to triumph. The relic had awakened something deep within their DNA, a latent potential that now burned with the intensity of the sun. It was as if the very fabric of humanity was aligned with the energy of the earth itself. They were no longer just surviving, they were transforming into warriors born not just of struggle, but of purpose. And with that transformation came a new understanding. They were no longer the prey, they were the hunters, and they would take the fight to the invader's doorstep. The humans had learned to read the flow of battle. They anticipated every move the Arcturans made and turned it against them with a savage precision that sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. Their guerrilla tactics evolved into something more deadly. Now their attacks were surgical strikes against weak points in the Arcturan command structure. They no longer fought to hold ground, they fought to destroy the very heart of the invasion. Sophia Greer had become a key player in this new phase of the war. She had become the architect of the human counteroffensive, working with a group of scientists and engineers who had reverse-engineered Arcturan technology, using it to turn the tide of battle against their oppressors. Their new weapons were not just a match for the Arcturan tech, they surpassed it. The humans had learned to adapt faster than their enemies could keep up, and now their weapons tore through alien defenses with ease. Back in space, the Arcturan commanders were frantically trying to make sense of the chaos below them. Jarvik had never seen anything like this before. His fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that should have been beneath their notice. Now the Arcturans had to fight for every inch of ground, and as their ships began to fall one by one, they realized they were not fighting an enemy of flesh and blood. They were fighting something far more dangerous, something with an unbreakable will that could not be destroyed by force alone. Jarvik ordered a full retreat, but even as the Arcturan ships pulled back, the humans were already in pursuit. They had no intention of letting their enemies escape. They would not allow the Arcturans to regroup or rearm. They had tasted victory, and they would not stop until they had secured it. The humans did not take prisoners anymore. They did not ask for mercy. They were now the aggressors, the warriors of a world that had once been at the mercy of others, but they were no longer the underdogs. They were a rising tide, and the Arcturans could only watch as the human war machine closed in on their final retreat. The very idea of escape began to fade in the minds of the Arcturans as their ships were hunted down one by one. Jarvik had never felt so cornered. He had underestimated the humans, but now he understood the truth. They were not just fighting for their world, they were fighting for a future in the galaxy, one that no one could deny them. And as humanity's forces surged forward, he realized too late that the reckoning had begun and the galaxy would never be the same again. The final push came like a flood, unstoppable and relentless. Humanity's forces were everywhere. The Arcturan fleet had fractured, their ships scattered as their final lines of defense crumbled. The humans no longer fought for survival, they fought for victory. And they were achieving it one strike at a time. The energy of the relics surged through them, empowering every soldier, every civilian, every fighter who stood against the invaders. It was no longer a question of if they would win, it was a question of how much longer the Arcturans could last. Marcus Hale stood on the shattered streets of what had once been the heart of the invasion in Washington, D.C. The ruins of alien ships littered the ground, their energy shields burned out, their weapon systems gone. The sky above was clear, no longer darkened by Arcturan dreadnoughts. Humanity had fought tooth and nail for every inch of ground, but now it was theirs to keep. The alien invaders were no longer a threat. The humans had pushed them back, and now they were preparing to strike at the heart of the Arcturan Empire itself. Sophia Greer and her team had perfected the weaponry. They'd scavenged from the wreckage of alien ships, and human ingenuity had blended it all into a deadly new arsenal. They now held the power to not just defend Earth, but to launch a counteroffensive across the galaxy. They had cracked the code of the Arcturan technology, and in doing so had unlocked a new era for humanity, one where their technological edge was no longer limited to their homeworld. As the remnants of the Arcturan fleet scattered into the darkness of space, Marcus felt the weight of what had been accomplished, but he also understood the implications of their victory. Humanity was no longer just defending Earth, they were now a galactic power, a new force in the universe that could not be ignored and would not be ignored. The final battle was fought above the remains of the Arcturan mothership. It had once been the symbol of their strength, but now it was a burning wreck. The remaining invaders fought valiantly, but they were no match for the humans who had grown stronger. With every conflict, the remnants of the fleet tried to regroup, but their numbers were too small, their will had been broken, and it was clear to Jarvik that the war was over. Jarvik had once been confident that humanity was a mere footnote in the galaxy's history, but now he saw the truth. They were something entirely different. They were a new breed of warrior, born not of technology alone, but of spirit and resilience. Humanity had shown that they could survive and evolve faster than any species he had ever encountered. As the final Arcturan ships were hunted down, Marcus and Sophia stood together looking out at the stars. Earth was safe now, but the galaxy had become a far more dangerous place for the invaders who once believed they ruled it. The humans had proven they were not just survivors, they were conquerors. And as the last of the Arcturan ships turned into wreckage, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the era of humanity's unyielding rise had begun. Jarvik watched from his flagship as the last remnants of his empire crumbled beneath the weight of the human onslaught. He had no answers, only the bitter truth that the Arcturans had been the prey all along and humanity was the apex predator of the galaxy. Marcus turned to Sophia and spoke quietly, "We're just getting started." And with that, the stars themselves seemed to tremble as humanity began its rise toward the heavens, their empire now ready to claim its place among the stars.